You will never leave me. No court, no cop, no rich man with a fancy resort will change that. You belong to me, Claire, you and that little girl. And if you make me come back here again, I promise you, it won't be just your wrists that bruise. Travis Mercer said it through a locked door at 2 in the morning in a coastal storm to a woman he had spent 6 years systematically destroying, and he said it like a man who had never once been told no and meant it. What he didn't know was that a camera was recording every word, and that the man on the other side of the property had already made a choice that would cost him everything. If this story moves you, subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this reaches. The heating system at Blackwater Ridge Resort failed on the coldest night of the year. It was the kind of cold that came off the Oregon coast like a living thing, not just temperature, but pressure, weight, and tension. The kind of cold that found every gap in every wall and reminded you exactly how thin the line was between warmth and suffering. The resort's main boiler had been throwing warning signals for 2 days, and the head of maintenance had assured everyone it would hold through the weekend. It did not hold through the weekend. At 11:47 at night, Dominic Vale was still awake at his desk when the emergency line buzzed. He picked it up on the first ring, listened for approximately 4 seconds, and then set it down without saying a word. He stood up, pulled on his jacket, and walked out of his office. His assistant, a careful man named Gerald, who had worked for the Vale family for 19 years, immediately rose from his chair in the hallway. "Mr. Vale, I can send someone down." "Sit down, Gerald. The maintenance team is all ready." I said, "Sit down." Gerald sat down. Dominic's dog, Ranger, had been sleeping on the rug beside the office door. The moment Dominic moved, Ranger was on his feet. The dog was a Cane Corso large, scarred across the left shoulder from an incident 3 years earlier that nobody at the resort discussed openly. His face carried the kind of settled gravity that made grown men take a half step backward without fully understanding why. Ranger had not willingly approached a new employee in 4 years. He tolerated the staff. He endured introductions. He accepted the cautious, performative friendliness that people extended toward powerful men's dogs. But he had not chosen anyone, not in a very long time. He followed Dominic down the rear staircase, through the carpeted back corridor that guests never saw, and then down the concrete steps into the service level of the resort. The laundry corridor was overheated. The pipe system that ran along the ceiling had been compensating for the failed boiler by pushing steam through the secondary lines. And the result was a narrow hallway that felt like the inside of a greenhouse. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The smell was industrial hot fabric, mineral-heavy water, the particular exhaustion that came from a building working too hard. Dominic heard the cart before he saw her. The wheels needed oil. They made a sound like something reluctantly moving, a grinding, irregular complaint that someone with proper time and proper tools would have fixed weeks ago. He rounded the corner into the main laundry room and stopped. A woman was working alone. She was small, the kind of small that you noticed not because of fragility, but because of how much effort she was obviously putting into every physical task. She was moving a cart loaded with wet linens from the industrial washers toward the folding tables on the far wall, and the cart was clearly too heavy for one person. She was leaning into it at an angle, her whole body engaged, her jaw set, her eyes fixed on the destination, like if she looked away for even a second, the whole thing would stop. She had not heard him come in. The machines were too loud. She was wearing the full resort uniform, the long-sleeved black top with the small embroidered logo on the chest. The sleeves were buttoned tightly at the wrists. In this heat, every other staff member Dominic had seen in the service areas had rolled their sleeves to the elbow. Some had shed the top layer entirely and were working in undershirts. This woman's sleeves were buttoned tight enough that he could see the slight strain of the fabric at her wrists. He stood in the doorway. He did not speak. Ranger moved past him. This was the first thing that registered as wrong. Not wrong like something bad, but wrong like something unexpected. Like a word used correctly in a sentence where you had never heard it before. Ranger moved past Dominic's leg with the same quiet purposefulness he used when he was tracking something important, and he walked directly across the laundry room floor toward the woman with the overloaded cart. She turned at the sound of the dog's nails on the concrete. She startled backward. Her hand hit the edge of the cart, and the whole thing lurched. And for 1 second, it looked like it might tip. She grabbed the rail and caught it, and then she pressed herself against the machine beside her and stared at Ranger with the specific kind of fear that had nothing to do with dogs. It was the fear of someone who has learned that unexpected arrivals are almost never good news. He won't hurt you, Dominic said. She looked up and found him standing in the doorway, and the fear shifted. It did not disappear, it changed shape. He had seen that reaction before, the rapid internal calculation that happened in someone's eyes when they identified the most powerful person in the room and started rearranging their behavior accordingly. Mr. Vale. She straightened immediately. Her hands moved to smooth her apron. I'm sorry I didn't hear you come in. I was just finishing the last. I can come back if you need to. You don't need to come back anywhere, he said. Keep working. She blinked. I came down about the heating system, he added. The boiler issue. Oh, she exhaled. Yes. The water temperature dropped on the second floor units around 10. I reported it to the night supervisor. He said someone would look at it in the morning. It's 11:47. Yes, you're working at 11:47. She hesitated. I had extra loads to finish from the guest turnover this afternoon. I fell behind. Dominic looked at the cart. He looked at the folding tables. He looked at the clock on the wall above the doorway. He said nothing for several seconds. Ranger was still standing in the middle of the floor, watching her. Not aggressively, just watching. His tail had not moved. His posture was attentive, but not tense. The woman was watching the dog the way people watch things they have decided are probably safe, but are not entirely certain about. He's staring at me, she said. It wasn't a complaint. It was an observation delivered in a voice that was trying very hard to sound normal. He does that. Is he deciding something? Dominic looked at his dog for a moment. He usually has. She moved back to the cart carefully, giving Ranger a wide berth, and resumed pushing it toward the folding tables. Dominic watched her work. The cart was genuinely too heavy. Anyone could see that. She had stacked it the way someone stacks things when they are trying to make fewer trips efficient, practical, and physically unreasonable. She reached up to pull a sheet from the top of the pile, and her left sleeve slid. It moved 2 inches, maybe 3, from her wrist toward her forearm. Dominic's jaw tightened. Dark bruises. Not one. Not the single mark that comes from catching an edge or walking into furniture in the dark. These were layered older ones that had faded to a sick yellow-green beneath newer ones that were still deep purple and brown. They covered the inside of her forearm in a pattern that had no innocent explanation. No reasonable explanation. The geometry of them, the placement, the variation in age, told a story that Dominic had seen before. Not in this context, but he had seen it. She caught the sleeve before it fell further. She tugged it back down. She did not look at him. She kept folding. He said nothing. He stood there for perhaps 30 more seconds, watching her work in the brutal heat with her sleeves buttoned to her wrists, and then he turned and walked out of the laundry room. Ranger followed him after a pause that lasted just long enough to feel deliberate. In the corridor, Dominic stopped and leaned against the wall for a moment. He had learned a long time ago that there was a particular kind of violence that lived in private spaces. His own world had been full of it. Not just the obvious kind, not just the confrontations in parking garages or the debts settled behind closed restaurants. The subtler kind, the kind that operated in kitchens and bedrooms and on the inside of wrists at 11:47 at night in laundry rooms where nobody was supposed to be watching. He pushed off the wall and kept walking. But the image followed him up every flight of stairs. He saw her again the next morning. She was cleaning the main staircase, the wide, curved marble steps that led from the lobby down to the event level. She was on her knees on the 4th step, working at a scuff mark near the base of the banister with the kind of focused attention that suggested she had been told before that this particular area was never clean enough. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. He watched the exact moment she registered that it was him. Her whole body language shifted in a single breath. She moved back from the step, rose to her feet, and pressed herself against the banister to create as much space as possible. Good morning, Mr. Vale. I'm sorry I'll be out of your way. Just let me move the... You're not in my way. She stood anyway. She kept the cleaning supplies between herself and the open staircase, as though calculating exits was something she did automatically. He stopped 2 steps above her. How long have you worked here? 3 weeks, sir. And in those 3 weeks, have you recorded all your hours? Something passed through her expression. Not guilt, closer to a particular kind of shame that only appears in people who have been punished for doing the right thing. I record my scheduled hours, she said carefully. And the hours outside your schedule? A pause. I don't want to cause any problems. Answering my question won't cause any problems. She looked at the banister. Sometimes I stay late to finish things. I don't record those hours because I don't want management to think I'm the kind of person who has to be watched, that I'm making things complicated. Dominic studied her for a long moment. What's your name? Claire. Claire Bennett. Claire. Recording your hours isn't complicated. It's accurate. There's a difference. She nodded the way people nod when they are agreeing just to end a conversation. I'll have payroll go back 3 weeks, he said. Whatever hours you worked that weren't recorded, you'll receive payment for all of it. She went very still. I wasn't complaining, Mr. Vale. I wasn't asking for anything. I know you weren't. If this is about last night, I should have left the laundry for the morning shift. It was my mistake for staying so. Claire, she stopped. You're not in trouble, he said. She stared at him, and in her eyes he saw something that disturbed him far more than the bruises had. He saw that she genuinely did not know how to process those 4 words. She turned them over the way you turn over a sentence in a foreign language, recognizing the sounds, searching for the meaning, not quite trusting the translation. She finally nodded. Thank you, sir. He continued down the stairs. He did not look back, but he counted her breaths, and she only released the one she had been holding after he had turned the corner. Frank Delaney had been with Dominic for 11 years. He was 63, built like a man who had spent those years doing things that required either great physical strength or great physical endurance, and he had the particular kind of loyalty that came not from fear but from a debt he felt he could never fully repay. Dominic found him in his small office beside the rear loading dock that afternoon. Tell me about Claire Bennett. Frank didn't ask why. He never did. He folded his hands on the desk and said she came in on the late bus about 3 weeks ago. Portland Terminal. I was there picking up something else. Doesn't matter. I saw her on the platform, and she had a little girl with her, 5, 6 years old. One suitcase with the zipper broken and a duct tape patch holding it together. Old metal box under her arm. The kid was asleep standing up, just leaning against the mother with her eyes closed, trusting the woman to hold her up. Frank paused. I've sat in that terminal a lot of times. I know what people look like when they're waiting for someone. And I know what people look like when they've just run out of places to go. What did you do? I offered her money. What did she say? Frank looked at the window. She said no, right away. Didn't even think about it. Looked at me like I'd said something she didn't understand. He paused again. Then she asked me if I knew of anyone nearby who needed an honest worker. She didn't say a good worker or a hard worker. She said an honest worker. Like that was the only credential she had left that she was sure about. Dominic was quiet. I brought her here, Frank said. I told her we had a housekeeping position. I told her it was paid weekly, that healthcare started at 60 days and that the resort provided meal credits for employees. Did she ask any questions? 2. First, whether the job required references. Second, Frank stopped. Second, whether there was anyone on the property who would make it their business to know where she went when she was off shift. Dominic looked at him directly. She asked that specifically? Specifically. Those exact words. The room was quiet for a moment. Where is she staying? Dominic asked. Frank's expression shifted. It was a small movement, the compression of something uncomfortable. She's not staying in town. She's not renting anywhere. Her car is parked behind the East employee lot. She and the girl are sleeping in it. Dominic stood up. Show me. The car was a 2009 Honda Civic that had lived a difficult life. One headlight was brighter than the other. There was a crack along the bottom of the rear windshield that had been treated with clear tape. A small crack ran from the lower left corner of the front windshield toward the center, arrested by a second strip of tape. The back seat held a child's folded blanket, a worn stuffed rabbit, and 2 library books about marine animals. One of Lucy's drawings was taped to the rear passenger window, a house with a very tall chimney from which an enormous cloud of smoke poured into a paper sky. It was 28 degrees outside. Dominic stood beside Frank and looked at the car for a long time without saying anything. She runs the engine in intervals, Frank said quietly. 10 minutes on, engine off, 20 minutes. Then on again. She's terrified of anyone noticing the exhaust. I asked her about it yesterday, and she said she didn't want to attract any attention, that she might need to leave quickly if something happened. Does she think she was followed here? I think she thinks it's always possible. Frank looked at the cracked windshield. She doesn't think she's safe, Dominic. She thinks she's between places. She's not resting here. She's just waiting to have to move again. Dominic turned and walked back to the main building. He called Gerald before he reached the rear door. The groundskeeper's cottage on the east side. The small one near the greenhouse. The Hartley cottage, sir? It's been empty since March. The gutter's neat. Have it cleaned, heated, and ready by 6 o'clock tonight. Fresh bedding, kitchen stocked. Run a basic maintenance check. Pause. Sir, that cottage is typically reserved for. It will be reserved for whatever I say it's reserved for. Have it ready at 6. He hung up and found Frank still walking beside him. She'll refuse it, Frank said. I know, she doesn't take handouts. It's not a handout, it's staff housing. It comes with rent deducted directly from her paycheck. Frank was quiet for a moment. Then carefully, and if she figures out that the rent amount is significantly below market rate, then she's smart enough to figure that out, and I'll deal with it then. He found Claire at the end of the dinner service, resetting the linens in the staff dining room. She was working with the systematic thoroughness of someone who had been told once, a long time ago, that imperfect work was an act of disrespect. Every fold was exact. Every edge was aligned. There's a staff cottage available on the east side of the property, Dominic said from the doorway. She looked up. It's been sitting empty since spring. Property maintenance prefers to have someone in it during winter, easier to monitor the pipes if there's regular occupancy. The rent is deducted directly from your paycheck on a standard employee housing agreement. She looked at him the way she had looked at him when he said she wasn't in trouble. Like a person trying to identify the mechanism inside a gift. How much is the rent? She asked. He told her. She looked at the folded linen in her hands. She was doing math. He could see her doing it, running the number against what she knew about property costs in this part of the coast. She was not naive. She knew what market rate looked like. That's low, she said. The cottage is small and the gutters are in bad shape. Still, Claire, she looked up. There is no condition attached to this. You will work your shift, you will receive your pay, and you will pay your rent like any other employee on a housing agreement. That is the entirety of the arrangement. She looked at him for a long time. Long enough that it started to feel like a negotiation, though neither of them was speaking. I'll repay every dollar, she said. Whatever the actual market rate is. I'll pay the difference when I can. He had not expected that. Most people would have accepted the discount and called it luck. She was making a promise to repay money she didn't owe, to a man she had no reason to trust, because the integrity of the arrangement mattered to her more than the benefit of it. All right, he said. I mean it, Mr. Vale, I heard you mean it. He left her with the linens. He drove past the cottage at 7:30 that evening, after dark. The lights were on inside. Through the front window, there was the orange glow of the fireplace. He slowed just slightly, not enough to stop, but enough to see. Lucy was standing in front of the window, face tipped up, watching the flames. He could not hear what she was saying, but her mouth was open, and even from the road he could see that it was a sound of pure, uncomplicated delight. The mountains, the kind of sound children make when they encounter something they have wanted for so long that experiencing it for the first time feels like remembering it. He did not stop, he kept driving, but he sat with that image for the rest of the evening, in a way that he did not examine too closely. 3 days later, Dominic encountered Lucy in the staff break room at 3:45 in the afternoon. He had come down to retrieve something from the cabinet beside the refrigerator and found the break room occupied by a small girl sitting at the corner table with a box of crayons and a stack of folded paper. She had a hospital bracelet on her left wrist. Faded, the printing worn to illegibility, the plastic beginning to yellow at the edges. She looked up at him without fear, which was immediately unusual. You're the dog's person, she said. He sat down across from her without being invited. His name is Ranger, I know. He told me. Dominic looked at her for a moment. Dogs can't talk. Not with words. She returned to her drawing with absolute confidence. He put his head on my knee this morning. That means he likes me. It might just mean he was tired. He wasn't tired. He was deciding. She drew a careful chimney on the house she was working on. A very tall chimney. Mom said, you gave us the cottage. The resort has a staff housing program. Mom said you gave us the cottage, she repeated, with the particular patience of a child who has learned that adults sometimes need to hear things twice. Dominic said nothing. I cried when I saw the fireplace, Lucy said. Happy crying. Mom says there are two kinds, there are. I always draw chimneys, she said, because smoke means the house is warm and somebody's home. Mom says I draw them because I'm an optimist. Do you know what an optimist is? Someone who draws chimneys on houses even when they don't have one. She looked up at him. Are you an optimist? He looked at the hospital bracelet on her wrist. That depends on the day. She followed his gaze. She pulled her wrist slightly toward herself. Not a withdrawal, just an acknowledgement. I know it's old. Mom keeps trying to cut it off. Why don't you let her? Lucy was quiet for a moment. She looked at the bracelet with an expression that was far too considered for someone her age. Because it's the first thing I remember that had my right name on it. My whole name, Lucy Marie Bennett, not what he called me. My real name. She looked up. If you had something that had your real name on it, when nobody else was saying it right, would you keep it? Dominic did not answer immediately. He looked at the bracelet for a long moment. Yes, he said, I would. Lucy nodded as though this settled something. She went back to drawing. Can I ask you something? Dominic said. You're already asking. He almost smiled. When you were living before here, did you and your mom have any games you played? She didn't look up from the drawing, but her crayon slowed, just slightly. We played the counting game. When a car would slow down outside or somebody walked up the driveway, we'd lie down on the floor really quiet and count. Mom would whisper the numbers with me. We'd count until the car drove away or the footsteps went somewhere else. The break room was very quiet. That sounds like it required a lot of concentration, he said. Mom was really good at it. She never made a sound. Lucy picked up a yellow crayon and began adding windows to her house. I don't think she liked the game, but she was always good at it. She smiled while we played so I wouldn't be scared. Dominic sat with that for a moment. His jaw was tight. A woman who smiled while counting seconds on the floor so that her daughter would not know how frightened she was. Lucy looked up. Are you okay? Fine. She studied him with the frankness that children sometimes deploy and adults have mostly forgotten how to receive. You look like how Mom looks when she thinks about before. I might be thinking about something similar, he said. Lucy looked at him for another few seconds, then nodded as though she'd confirmed something and went back to drawing. He found Frank that evening. I need to know about Travis Mercer. Frank was quiet for a moment. Then, how much do you want to know? Everything you have. Frank poured 2 glasses of water, not because either of them needed water, but because his hands needed something to do. He's from Portland. Commercial real estate. Clean on paper. Personable. The kind of man who coaches Little League and gets written up in local business press. His name doesn't come up in anything criminal. But Frank looked at the glass in his hand. She left in January. Middle of the night, took a suitcase. Left her car at a grocery store parking lot and took 3 buses. Paid cash. She planned it. She'd been planning it. He paused. Dominic, a woman doesn't plan an exit like that for 6 months because she's unhappy. She plans an exit like that because she's calculated the risk of staying against the risk of going and determined that the risk of going, which includes everything unknown, is still safer than the certainty of what she already knows. Dominic said nothing for a long time. Does he know where she is? He asked. Not yet, Frank said. The words sat between them like something with weight. Not yet. He saw Ranger first early on a Thursday morning, crossing the courtyard alone. The dog had gone out through the rear staff entrance the way he sometimes did in the mornings, a deliberate, unhurried walk that Dominic had long stopped trying to supervise. Ranger went where he needed to go. He came back when he was done. Dominic was on the 2nd floor balcony with coffee and the previous day's property reports when the dog stopped in the middle of the courtyard. Claire was coming around the corner from the direction of the greenhouse with a set of pruning tools she had borrowed from the groundskeeping closet. She had not asked permission. She had simply done what needed doing, another habit he was beginning to recognize in her. She stopped when she saw Ranger in her path. The dog looked at her. She looked at the dog. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Ranger walked across the courtyard, unhurried, and lay down beside her feet. Not at her feet, beside them. Close enough to feel. Claire stood very still. She looked down at him. Then slowly she crouched and put her hand on his back. Ranger did not move away. He let out a slow breath and pressed into her hand the way dogs do when they have made a decision and they want you to know it's permanent. Dominic stood on the balcony and watched this for a long time. He had owned Ranger for 6 years. He had watched the dog assess 1,000 people, employees, family members, business associates, law enforcement, every category of human being that moved through the orbit of Blackwater Ridge. He had watched Ranger endure handshakes and let himself be photographed and tolerate the false warmth of people who were trying to impress Dominic by pretending to like his dog. He had never watched Ranger choose. Not like this. Not that deliberate, unhurried walk across open ground. Not that particular exhale. He set down his coffee. He had grown up in a world where trust was a transaction, something you extended carefully in measured amounts with the calculation of someone who knew exactly what betrayal cost. He had learned to read people through their choices, their patterns, their reactions under pressure. He had built an organization and was now painstakingly rebuilding it on the principle that real information lived not in what people said but in what they did when they thought no one was watching. The dog who trusted no one had walked across an open courtyard and made a decision in plain sight. Dominic looked down at Claire, still crouched beside Ranger in the courtyard, her hand moving slowly along the dog's back. She was saying something he couldn't hear it from the balcony. But her head was bent slightly toward the dog, and she was talking to him the way you talk to something that understands you without needing you to explain yourself. He understood, in that moment, with a clarity that was almost uncomfortable, that the bruises on her wrists were not the entirety of the story. They were barely the beginning of it. And whatever Travis Mercer had spent years building inside that woman, whatever architecture of fear and silence and learned smallness had not finished her, had not reached the part of her that still bent toward a dog in a cold courtyard and spoke to him like he deserved the truth. He turned away from the balcony. He needed to learn what was coming. He needed to learn it before it arrived. Because Frank had said not yet, and Dominic knew from long and painful experience that not yet was just another word for soon. And when it came, he needed to be certain of one thing above all others, that whatever happened next, Claire Bennett would be the one who decided how it ended. Not Travis, not Raymond, not Dominicer. He went back inside and picked up the phone. The phone call Dominic made that night lasted 47 minutes. He did not tell Frank everything he learned. He did not tell Gerald anything at all. He sat with what he knew the way you sit with something heavy, not because you enjoy the weight, but because putting it down without a plan would only mean someone else picks it up for you. What he knew was this: Travis Mercer had not filed a missing persons report. He had not contacted Portland police. He had not done any of the things a worried husband does when his wife and daughter disappear in the middle of the night. Instead, he had made 3 phone calls in the week following their disappearance, all to the same number. A number that traced back to a consulting firm in Seattle that did not appear to consult on anything. The not yet that Frank had spoken was becoming a shape. It had edges now, a direction. Dominic set that knowledge in a particular corner of his mind where he kept things that required patience and went to bed. He did not sleep well. Claire, meanwhile, had developed a system. Every morning she was up before 5. She made breakfast for Lucy on the small stove in the cottage, packed what was left into a container that she tucked into her apron before her shift started. At first, Dominic thought she was skipping the staff meal. He had Gerald check the meal credit logs and found she was signing in each day, taking a tray, sitting for the minimum amount of time socially possible, and leaving. Frank told him she was eating standing up beside the refrigerator in the staff kitchen, putting most of the food back in her pockets. On a Wednesday evening, 11 days after she moved into the cottage, Dominic came into the staff dining room at the tail end of the dinner service and found exactly that. Claire standing beside the far counter, plate in hand, eating quickly with the focused efficiency of someone who has been conditioned to finish before someone notices. Every other chair at the long staff table was occupied. Frank was at the head. Gerald had come down, which he rarely did. 3 of the housekeeping supervisors were there. The maintenance crew. A table full of people eating together the way people eat when they feel safe enough to talk. Claire was 6 feet away from all of it, standing, eating alone. Dominic pulled out the empty chair directly to Frank's right. "Sit down," he said, not loudly, just clearly. She looked up. Her eyes went from him to the chair to the table full of people watching the interaction with varying degrees of subtlety. "I'm almost done," she said. "I don't want to." "You're not almost done. You've eaten half a plate." She looked at the plate. "Claire." He said it the same way he had said it on the stairs. Not in order. A door being held open. "Everyone who works here eats together." She walked to the chair like a woman walking across uncertain ice, each step deliberate, each movement managed. She sat down. She put her plate on the table. Frank immediately passed her the potatoes. He did not make eye contact with her. He just passed the potatoes the way you pass potatoes to the person next to you, because that is what you do when someone sits down at a table and there are potatoes to pass. He resumed his sentence mid-word, something about a supplier issue with the East Dock. The table resumed its noise around Claire, the way water resumes its movement around a stone. Nobody asked her anything. Nobody looked at her with sympathy or curiosity or the particular evaluative attention that makes a newcomer feel like a specimen. They just included her in the ambient fact of the meal. Dominic watched her shoulders drop approximately 1 centimeter. She picked up her fork. That was the first meal Claire Bennett ate in years without calculating whether someone would punish her for taking too much. He did not mark it visibly. He did not say anything to Frank about it afterward. But he filed it with the same careful attention he gave to everything else, the way a man files a document he expects to need again. The potatoes went around the table a second time. Claire took more. Nobody said a word about it. 8 days after the dinner, she dropped the box. He was coming down the main staircase from the east wing when he heard a sharp metallic crack followed by the scattered sound of paper on marble. He came around the landing and found Claire on her knees. On the fourth step, the old metal box opened. Its contents spread across 3 steps in every direction. Medical records, handwritten receipts from pawn shops, several dried flowers pressed flat between pieces of wax paper, their color mostly gone but their shape intact. A folded photograph, its edges soft from years of handling. And paper after paper, some official looking, some handwritten, all of them clearly important in the way that things become important when they are all you have left. Ranger had come down behind Dominic. He moved past him without instruction and began very carefully gathering the papers, not snatching, retrieving, one sheet at a time, carrying them back to where Claire was kneeling, depositing them beside her hand with the deliberateness of an animal that understood this mattered. Claire took each paper from him with a murmured thank you that she probably didn't realize she was saying out loud. Dominic came down the last steps and crouched beside her, picking up the scattered receipts from the lower step. That was when he saw her wrist again. She reached past him for the photograph and her sleeve fell back, and the bruises were there, different ones this time, or the same ones changing color as they healed, and underneath them the older shadows that had gone a sickly greenish yellow. Her whole forearm was a document of something that had happened to her repeatedly and systematically over a period of time that was too long to think about directly. She yanked the sleeve down. I bruise easily, she said, quickly, the words already prepared. Always have. My mother was the same way. Dominic handed her the receipts he had gathered. He did not look away from her. I know what accidental bruises look like, he said quietly. She took the papers. She did not respond. Claire, I need to get these back in the box, she said. Her voice was controlled in the way voices are controlled when the person speaking is also doing the significant work of not crying. All right? He did not push. He kept handing her papers one at a time, watching her fit them back into the box with hands that were slightly unsteady. When everything was gathered, she closed the lid and held it in both hands. The way you hold something you are afraid of dropping again. He sat down on the step beside her, not above her, beside her, at the same level. She looked at him sideways. Your mother, he said. Tell me about her. It was the last thing she was expecting him to say. He could see it, the small recalibration that happened behind her eyes. Why? Because you mentioned her, and you look like you needed to mention her. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she had a flower shop. Small one, near the waterfront in Portland. She bought it when I was 7, with the money from my father's life insurance. She said she figured if she was going to spend her life doing something, it should be something that required her to pay attention to whether things were still alive. A short breath, almost a laugh. She was very practical, my mother. She made it sound like a business decision, was it? No. Claire looked at the box in her hands. She loved flowers the way some people love music. Like they said something she couldn't say herself. A pause. She used to tell me that a wilted flower wasn't necessarily dead. That sometimes it was just waiting for someone to notice it. The staircase was quiet. Somewhere below them, the kitchen staff was finishing the lunch service. The sounds were distant and ordinary and had nothing to do with the two of them sitting on the fourth step. When did she die? He asked. 4 years before I met Travis. She said the name the way you say the name of something that hurt you, briefly, clinically, getting it out of your mouth as fast as possible. She would have seen through him immediately. She was good at that. She could tell the difference between a plant that needed water and a plant that needed to be removed entirely. A beat. I wasn't as good at it as she was. You were 20-something and alone, Dominic said. I was stupid. Those aren't the same thing. She looked at him. For a moment, something moved in her expression. Not gratitude, something older than gratitude. Something that had been waiting a long time for someone to make that particular distinction. He seemed protective, she said, and the words came out with a flatness that told him she'd examined them from every angle and was no longer surprised by what they revealed. At first, that's what it felt like. Like I'd finally found somebody who wanted to take care of things. Who noticed when I was tired, who wanted to know where I was. She paused. And then at some point I couldn't you exactly when noticing where I was became needing to know where I was. And then needing to know became deciding. And by the time it turned into something I recognized as wrong, I had already agreed to so many small things that I couldn't find the place where I should have said no. Dominic said nothing. He let her have the silence. The bank accounts went to his name, she continued, quieter now. Then the car. Then my telephone had parental controls on it. He said it was a joke, and I laughed because I didn't know how to not laugh. He decided where we went and when and who we saw. He told me what I should wear to his company events and stood outside the dressing room while I changed to make sure I'd gotten it right. She stopped. I know how it sounds when I say it like that. I know exactly how it sounds. It sounds like a pattern, Dominic said. It sounds like I let it happen. Those are not the same thing either. She looked at him again. This time she didn't look away as fast. I left because of Lucy, she said. Not because of what he was doing to me. That I'd learn to manage it. But one night he came home and she'd left her toys on the stairs. And the way he looked at her, the way his voice changed. She pressed her lips together. She was 5 years old, and she looked at him the way I looked at him. And I recognized it. And I thought, I will not let her learn this. I will not let her count the seconds until a car drives away and think that's just what life is. The kitchen sounds continued below them. Ordinary. Distant. I took what I could carry, Claire said. I thought about it for 6 months. Every bus route. Every shelter that would accept a mother with a child. No references, no credit. Every option. She straightened slightly. And then I left. Dominic looked at the metal box in her hands. You took her drawings, he said. Claire blinked. She hadn't expected him to notice that. Yeah, she said softly. I couldn't take much. But I took every drawing she'd ever made. A pause. She deserved to have someone who thought her drawings were worth carrying. Dominic stood up. He offered his hand to help her up, which she didn't take. She rose on her own and then seemed to realize the small rejection might have looked rude and opened her mouth to apologize. Don't, he said. She closed her mouth. Come with me, he said. I want to show you something. The greenhouse was at the far east edge of the resort property, set apart from the main buildings by a stretch of ground that the landscaping crew had given up on sometime the previous spring. The structure itself was original to the property. Dominic's grandfather had built it in 1962 with the intention of growing produce for the resort kitchen. It had served that purpose for about 15 years and then gradually been overtaken by time and weather and competing priorities. The glass panels were a mix of intact, cracked, and missing. The irrigation system had rusted into a configuration that no longer moved water in any productive direction. The wooden potting benches along the interior walls had warped and split. The whole structure smelled of soil and iron and something that was almost alive. Claire walked into it and stopped. She looked up at the vaulted glass ceiling, the parts of it that were still there. She looked at the light coming through. I need someone to run this, Dominic said from behind her. Fresh flowers for the guest rooms. Whatever can be grown in this coastal climate. The resort has a purchasing budget for cut flowers from suppliers. Anything you can grow here offsets that cost. The position would include management of the space and any materials required. She turned around. You're inventing this. Look around you, he said. Does any part of this look invented? She looked around. At the warped wood, at the rusted pipes, at the empty soil trays on the floor with their split corners, at the genuine, thorough, years-long neglect of a space that someone had once cared about and then abandoned. She looked back at him, and then for the first time since he had met her, Claire Bennett laughed. It was a real laugh, short, surprised, involuntary. It lasted maybe 2 seconds before she pressed it back down out of old habit, but it had been there, completely real. The laugh of someone who has just been caught being charmed against their will and found the experience sufficiently absurd. It would take months, she said, recovering her composure. I'm not going anywhere, the irrigation alone. There's a maintenance budget. The glass panels on the south side are. There's a repair budget. She looked at him steadily. He returned the look with the particular patience of someone who has already decided how this conversation ends and is waiting for the other person to arrive there. I want it in writing, she said finally. The job description, the wage, the oversight structure, everything. Gerald will have it ready tomorrow morning. She looked back at the greenhouse, at the light through the broken glass, at the empty trays where things could grow. Okay, she said. It was the first yes she had given anyone in this place that didn't sound like it also contained the question, is that the right answer? 3 weeks into the greenhouse restoration, on a Tuesday morning in early February, Lucy ran. It was not a long run. She went from the cottage door to the far edge of the courtyard, not even 50 yards. She was chasing Ranger, who had learned that her pursuit speed was sufficiently slow to make the game interesting without being distressing. She was laughing. Her arms were out. She collapsed when she hit the grass on the far side of the courtyard. Not a fall. A collapsed leg simply. She sat down hard and put one hand on the ground and the other on her chest, and her face went a color that Dominic, watching from across the yard, recognized as wrong before he could have articulated why. Claire was out of the greenhouse door in 2 seconds. She covered the ground between them in a way that told him she had been watching, that some part of her was always watching, that this had happened before. She was on the ground beside Lucy instantly, her hand on the girl's face, her voice very controlled and very quiet. Hey, look at me. Count with me, okay? Start from 1. Lucy looked at her mother. Her lips were slightly blue. 1, Lucy whispered. 2. Dominic was already calling Frank. Frank called the clinic. The clinic doctor arrived in 18 minutes. The pediatric cardiologist's appointment happened 2 days later. The diagnosis was a congenital heart defect, a valve that had never quite closed correctly, compensated for by a small body that had simply worked harder than it should have to do ordinary things: running, climbing stairs, laughing. The surgeon at the Portland hospital was direct with Claire in a way that had no kindness in it, because kindness would have been dishonest. The procedure needed to happen within the next several months. Waiting longer carried risks that he listed carefully, and that Claire received without moving a muscle in her face. She asked about cost, he told her. Her new insurance had a 60-day waiting period for major procedures. She had been employed at Blackwater Ridge for 41 days. She thanked the surgeon, gathered her coat, took Lucy's hand, and walked out of the office. In the elevator going down, she kept her face completely still. When the elevator doors opened on the ground floor, she walked through the lobby and out the front door and stood on the sidewalk for approximately 45 seconds. Then she sat down on the curb, put her face in her hands, and allowed herself 30 seconds of something she had not allowed in a very long time. Dominic, who had driven them and was waiting with the car at the curb, did not say anything. He let the 30 seconds happen. Then she raised her head, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and said, "I need to figure this out." "We'll figure it out," he said. She looked at him sharply. He held the look for a moment. "Start talking." "I'll listen." She talked the whole drive back. Options, timelines, numbers. She had already, in the 45 minutes since the diagnosis, begun running calculations. She had a particular kind of intelligence that revealed itself in crisis, not the intelligence of someone who had been educated in comfortable circumstances, but the intelligence of someone who had spent years solving problems with inadequate resources and no safety margin. She thought in contingencies. She thought sideways. Dominic listened to every word and said almost nothing, because she was already solving it. She just needed someone to listen while she worked. That night, after Lucy was asleep, he sat in his office and made calls, not to pay for the surgery. He was clear with himself about this: paying directly would place her in a debt to him that would feel, however unintentionally, like a chain. He had watched what chains felt like on Claire Bennett, and he would not be the one who put another one on her. He called the hospital's legal department. He called the insurance company's case review board. He called 2 people who owed him the kind of favor that gets a case escalated without needing to know why. The insurance review was approved for expedited consideration within 4 days. He did not tell Claire he had made those calls. He did not have to. Detective Elena Brooks came to the resort on a Thursday afternoon, and she did not come to see Dominic. She came in through the main guest entrance, asked for Claire by name at the front desk, and was directed to the greenhouse. She was 41, carried herself with the particular self-containment of someone who had worked law enforcement long enough to stop performing it, and she wore a badge on her belt that was partially visible and partially not calibrated. Dominic suspected for exactly how much authority she needed any given conversation to register. Frank told Dominic she was there within 4 minutes. Dominic did not go to the greenhouse. He stood at the window of his office and made himself not go to the greenhouse for 22 minutes. Then Frank knocked. "She's leaving," he said. "Claire's staying. Is she all right?" Frank looked at him for a moment with an expression that was careful and honest and a little sad. "She's sitting on the potting bench in there. She has a folder of documents in her lap." "What kind of documents?" "The kind that law enforcement gives you when they want something from you." Dominic walked to the door, stopped, and turned back. "Leave her alone," he said. "She'll come to me when she's ready." Frank nodded once. Claire came to him 40 minutes later. She knocked on his open office door and waited until he looked up before she entered, which was not something she needed to do, and which told him exactly how precisely she was managing herself right now, following every protocol, holding every boundary, keeping herself inside the lines, because if she let herself be slightly less careful, she was not sure what would happen. She put the folder on his desk. She wants me to help her build a case, Claire said. Against you, against your family. She was looking at him directly. No deflection. She says the federal investigation has been ongoing for 3 years. That your father, that the organization under Raymond, has connections that you haven't been able to sever. She says they have evidence of the lending network and the properties, and they need documentation of current operations. Dominic looked at the folder. He did not open it. She wants you to wear a recording device, he said. It was not a question. Yes, while you work here. Yes. Silence held the room for a moment. Outside, a gust of wind pushed against the east-facing windows. And if you agree, he said, she arranges for Lucy's surgery through federal health care allocation, plus relocation, new identification, housing in another state. Claire's jaw moved slightly. Dominic sat back in his chair. He looked at the folder on his desk. He looked at Claire standing across from it. He thought about the counting game. He thought about the potatoes going around the table. He thought about 30 seconds on a curb outside a hospital. He pushed the folder back across the desk toward her. I'm not going to tell you what to do, he said. She blinked. You need to understand what she's offering. I understand exactly what she's offering. Then you understand that Lucy's surgery. I understand. He stood up. He walked to the window and then turned back to face her because this was too important to say sideways. Claire, Travis spent years making every decision in your life. He decided what you wore and what you ate and where you went and who you talked to. He decided the answer before you'd finished forming the question. A pause. If I use everything I have access to right now, the legal exposure, the pressure of this situation, my own preference is to steer you toward a specific choice. I am doing exactly what he did. Cleaner, maybe. Better intention. Definitely. But I am doing it. She stared at him. You brought me this folder instead of using it, he said. That means you already know what you think. You just needed someone to confirm that it was yours to decide. Her hands at her sides were very still. When you can say no to me, he said, and lose nothing, not your job, not your home, not Lucy's care, then I'll know you're genuinely free to decide anything at all, including this. She was quiet for a long time. The wind outside kept moving. What about the investigation? She said finally. If they come for you, then they come for me. That part is mine to manage. And if what they find destroys everything you're trying to build here, he looked at her steadily. Then I was building it on the wrong foundation to begin with. She picked up the folder from the desk. She held it the way she'd held the metal box, after dropping it on the stairs like something valuable and complicated and entirely her own. I'm not going to wear the device, she said. He said nothing. But I'm going to tell Detective Brooks that I'll report anything I personally witness. Anything real. She paused. Not for the case. Because if there's something actually wrong happening here, I want to know I saw it clearly. That's a reasonable position. It's my position, she said, not correcting him, claiming it. He nodded once. She turned and walked out of the office. Her back was straight. Her chin was up. Her hands were still. She walked like a woman who had just made a decision without anyone making it for her. And she knew the difference. And the difference was changing the way she held her body in the world. He watched her go and stayed very still for a moment after the door closed. He had done a lot of things in his life. He had made decisions that he could not undo and carried the weight of them and would carry them until the end. He was not the hero of anything. He knew that clearly. And standing in his office on that Thursday afternoon, watching a woman walk away from his door because she had chosen to rather than because she had to, that was the closest thing to the right thing he had managed in a very long time. He pulled out his phone and called the one person in his life who needed to understand that the timeline had changed, because not yet was becoming now, and he was not going to be caught unprepared. The call Dominic made that Thursday night lasted 9 minutes. He did not raise his voice once. He did not make threats. He spoke in the flat, measured register that people who had worked around him for years had learned to fear more than shouting, the voice he used when something had already been decided, and the only question remaining was the order of consequences. When he hung up, Frank was standing in the doorway. Raymond is coming, Dominic said. Frank did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had been expecting a particular kind of weather and was now watching it arrive. When tomorrow? He called Gerald an hour ago to confirm the visit. He was already on the road when he called. Frank was quiet for a moment. Does he know about Claire? He knows everything about Claire. Dominic set the phone down on his desk with a precision that was the physical equivalent of keeping his voice level. That's why he's coming. Raymond Vale arrived the following afternoon in a car that cost more than most people's houses. He was 67 years old, built like a man who had once been physically formidable and was now formidable in different, subtler ways. He had Dominic's father's eyes, the same calculation behind them, the same habitual measurement of every room he entered. He had spent 4 years in federal prison when Dominic was 19, absorbing a conviction that belonged to Dominic's father, and he had come out of those 4 years with an investment in the family debt that he collected on, with the patience of someone who understood that compound interest applied to loyalty as readily as it applied to money. He did not shake Dominic's hand when he came in the office. He sat down across the desk without being invited and looked around the room the way men look at rooms they consider to be theirs by right of history. "You look tired," Raymond said. "I'm fine. You've been fine for 6 months. Before that, you were building something. There's a difference." He paused. "The difference is a housekeeper." Dominic said nothing. Raymond leaned forward slightly. "Her husband owes us money, Dominic. Not a small amount. $60,000 through the Portland lending channel. 11 months overdue with a rate structure that has not been charitable about the delay." He settled back. "I offered Travis Mercer a resolution 3 weeks ago. In exchange for a portion of the debt, I provided him with certain information." The room went very still. "You told him where she was," Dominic said. "I told him where his wife was." Raymond's voice carried the precise inflection of a man who believes language is a tool for controlling the frame. "That is not a crime. A man has a right to know where his family is located." Dominic looked at him for a long time. "What did you expect to happen?" "I expected a resolution." Raymond spread his hands. "If he comes here and takes his wife home quietly, the debt is partially resolved. The family avoids an uncomfortable complication, and you return your attention to the legitimate transition you claim to care so much about. And if he comes here and it goes badly," Raymond's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted, a small, precise acknowledgement. "If it goes badly, the police come to Blackwater Ridge. Federal investigators already watching this property have documented evidence of the confrontation. Your name is attached to whatever occurs on this property. The legitimate transition becomes very difficult to explain to the banks and the partners who are currently, thanks to your considerable effort, just barely willing to believe it." A pause. "Every option produces a result that is inconvenient for you. That is not accidental." Dominic looked at his uncle for a long moment. He was very calm. The particular calm that comes not from peace, but from having already worked through anger and arrived somewhere on the other side of it. "You built a trap," Dominic said. "I created a circumstance." Raymond stood. "A man at the top cannot afford someone he wants to save, Dominic. The position doesn't allow for it. Your father understood that." He straightened his jacket. "I'm staying at the North Suite. I imagine we'll speak again before this is resolved." He left without waiting for a response. Dominic sat at his desk and did not move for 4 minutes. Then he called Frank. "Double the perimeter cameras on the east side," he said, "cottage included. I want the feed monitored around the clock, and find out where Travis Mercer is right now." Frank called back in 18 minutes. Travis Mercer had checked into a motel in the coastal town 12 miles south of Blackwater Ridge 2 days ago. He had paid cash. He had asked the front desk about road access to the resort. Not yet had become now. The storm arrived 3 days later. It came off the Pacific the way coastal storms came, not gradually, but all at once, as though the weather had been holding itself back and then simply stopped. The wind hit the resort at just after 9 in the evening, and the rain followed within minutes. The kind of rain that found its way horizontal and made the exterior lights look like they were drowning. Lucy was safe. She was spending the night with Donna, one of the kitchen supervisors who had quietly adopted Lucy as a kind of honorary grandchild over the previous weeks. Donna had 2 cats, a collection of board games, and a particular warmth that asked nothing in return. Lucy had gone willingly, carrying her stuffed rabbit and a new set of crayons that Donna had produced with suspicious preparedness. Claire had stayed at the cottage. She had worked in the greenhouse until 7, come home, eaten, and was reading at the small table when the storm intensified. At some point, she moved to the chair beside the window and sat watching the rain. Not because the rain was interesting, because sitting with her back to the room had started to feel wrong in a way she couldn't name precisely, but had learned not to ignore. She had learned, during 6 months of planning her exit, to trust the feeling that preceded the thought. At 11:15, she got up and walked to the rear window. She had installed a small convex security mirror on the exterior wall 2 weeks after moving in, not conspicuously, just angled slightly at the corner where the path from the service road met the cottage yard. She had told herself it was practical. She had not told herself it was because she had been watching for headlights from outside her bedroom window for 3 years. The mirror showed her the yard, the rain, the wind moving through the grass, and a shadow that was not moving the way shadows move in wind. Her body knew before her mind finished the sentence. Something cold moved through her chest that had nothing to do with temperature. She stepped back from the window. She did not turn on any additional lights. She moved to the kitchen counter where her phone was charging and picked it up. Her hands were very steady, which was how she knew the fear was serious. She had noticed long ago that her hands went steady when the situation was real and shook when it was only anxiety. She pressed the emergency notification on the resort's internal security app. Then she called Detective Brooks. Brooks picked up on the second ring. "He's here," Claire said quietly, "at the cottage. Rear yard." "How certain?" "Are you inside?" "Yes, door's locked. He doesn't know I've seen him." "Stay on the line. I'm 12 minutes away. Don't open any door." Claire set the phone on the counter with the line open. She moved to the rear door and checked the bolt a second time. Then she did something she had not planned to do, but did with the same quiet, procedural efficiency as everything else. She reached up and activated the rear exterior security camera that she had quietly asked maintenance to install 3 weeks ago, citing concerns about the property perimeter. She had not told Dominic she asked for it. She had not told anyone except the maintenance worker who did the job. The camera was recording. Travis's voice came through the door at 12:47. He had moved from the yard to the rear step. She had not heard him cross the yard, which told her the wind had been covering his movement, which told her he had been waiting for a gust before each step, which told her he had planned this more carefully than she had wanted to believe. "Claire." His voice through the door was almost gentle. It was the voice he used when he had decided that charm was still an available option. "I just need a minute. I have some documents, financial things. I need your signature and then I'm gone. I swear to God, that's all this is." She did not respond. "Claire, I know you're in there. The light was on until 20 minutes ago." A pause. "I'm not angry. I understand why you left. I've had a lot of time to think and I understand. But we need to handle the financial separation properly. There are accounts, documents. I need your signature, or it holds up the whole process." She was counting. Not from fear, from information. He had moved to the step in 12 minutes of her seeing his shadow. He had waited 8 minutes before speaking. He had started with documents and signatures. He would move to the children next. "Lucy must miss Portland," he said through the door. "Her friends, her school. I've spoken to a family therapist who says disruption at her age. The financial documents," Claire said, exactly loud enough to reach the door. "You can send them through my attorney." A pause. When he spoke again, the gentleness had thinned slightly. "You don't have an attorney." Another pause. Longer this time. "Claire, open the door." "No, I will stand on this step until morning if I have to. I will stand here until Travis." Her voice was completely level. "The camera above the rear door has been recording since you entered the yard. Everything you've said is documented. Detective Brooks of the Federal Task Force is currently approximately 8 minutes from this property. A beat. You should make a decision about how you want the rest of this night to go." Complete silence from the other side of the door. Then his voice came back, and the gentleness was entirely gone. "You think that man is going to protect you? You think you matter to him? You're a housekeeper. You clean his floors, and he feels sorry for you, and you've mistaken that for something it isn't." His voice dropped, and what came through the door was the real voice, the one she had heard at 2 in the morning in their kitchen. "You belong to me, Claire. Not him, not to this place. You don't get to just walk out of your life because you've decided it's inconvenient. I will take Lucy. I will go to every court in this state, and I will tell them exactly what kind of woman you are, and no judge alive will." The headlights hit the cottage yard at that moment like a physical interruption. Not one set of lights, 4. Vehicles coming around the East Service Road simultaneously. The kind of coordinated arrival that has a specific grammar. This is not an accident. This is not curiosity. This is an answer. Travis went quiet. Dominic got out of the first vehicle. He was not dressed for a confrontation. He had on what he'd been wearing in his office shirt, jacket, no theater. Ranger was beside him. Frank was a step behind. 4 other men spread to the perimeter of the yard in the specific geometry of people who have been placed, not wandered. Travis stood on the rear step of the cottage and looked at the yard full of men and tried to recalibrate. Mr. Vale. He was trying for reasonable. He was trying for the voice he used in business meetings when a deal had not gone his way, but he still believed he could recover it. "This is a private matter between me and my wife. I understand you have an interest in protecting your employees, which I respect. But this is a family, Frank, Dominic said. Frank already had his phone out. Yes, call the police. Give them my full name. Tell them where we are. The yard went absolutely silent, except for the wind and rain. Frank looked at him. Not with surprise. Frank had not been surprised by Dominic in 11 years. He looked at him with the careful attention of a man making sure he had heard correctly, because what he had heard was significant enough to warrant confirmation. All of it? Frank said. Your name specifically? All of it. My name, the address. Travis Mercer's name. Tell them there is a possible violation of a protective order in progress, and that I am on the property and have requested their presence. Frank looked at him for one more second. Then he made the call. Travis stared at Dominic from the cottage step. His recalibration was not working anymore. You understand what happens when police come here? With your families. I'm aware of what happens, Dominic said. He had not raised his voice. He had not moved from where he was standing. He looked at Travis with the particular quality of attention you give to something you have already decided you are not afraid of. You should be thinking about what happens to you. Travis's composure finally cracked, just slightly a hairline fracture in the constructed surface of a man who had spent years performing reasonableness in rooms where he held all the power. She's my wife. She's a woman standing behind a locked door, counting the seconds until help arrives, Dominic said. I've watched her do that. I know exactly what it looks like, and I know exactly what put that skill into her. Travis took a step toward him. Ranger moved. Not aggressively, he placed himself between Travis and the forward line of the yard with the unhurried precision of something that has done this before and does not need to perform it. He was simply there, and then Travis's next step would have required stepping through him, and Travis stopped. Frank said quietly from behind Dominic, he can fix this quietly. Travis goes away, nobody finds him. 2 calls and it's done. He wasn't suggesting it. He was presenting it the way Frank presented things as information, complete and accurate, available for consideration. Dominic did not turn around. That's what Raymond is waiting for, he said. Yes, if I do it that way, I become the reason Claire never has to be afraid of Travis again. But I also become the person who decided for her, again. He paused. Different hands. Frank was quiet. Police sirens were audible in the distance. 12 miles of coastal road. In a storm, they were still minutes away, but the direction was correct and the sound was real, and Travis heard it. His whole body registered it. You're destroying your family's organization, Travis said. His voice had gone strange, a kind of disbelief that had not yet processed itself into any other emotion. For her, for a housekeeper. You're doing this. My father taught me how to make men disappear, Dominic said. He said it clearly and without drama, the way you state a fact that is simply true. Tonight, I'm learning how to let the truth stay visible. The police arrived in 9 minutes. 2 squad cars and a third vehicle that held a detective who was not Elena Brooks, but who had been briefed by her. Travis was taken off the cottage step with the specific professional efficiency of officers who had been told exactly what they were arriving to and had the documentation to support it. He did not go quietly. He was composed until the handcuffs were on, and then he was not composed, and what came out of him in those few seconds directed at the officers, directed at Dominic, directed at the cottage window, where Claire's silhouette was barely visible, was the real inventory of what he had always believed about the world and his place in it. Nobody in the yard looked away. They let it be heard. The cars left. The yard was very quiet. Frank stood beside Dominic and said nothing for a long time. Then the cottage door opened. Claire stepped out into the rain. She was not wearing a coat. She stood on the rear step, where Travis had been standing 60 seconds earlier, and looked at Dominic across the yard. He looked back at her. She did not say anything immediately. She looked at the empty space where the police cars had been, and then at the men dispersing toward the service road, and then at Ranger, who had walked back to Dominic's side and was now watching her with that still, settled attention. You called the police, she said. With your name. Yes. You know what that means for the investigation, for the businesses, for everything. Yes. She looked at him for a long time. The rain was coming sideways and neither of them moved. Why, she said. He thought about the counting game. He thought about a child standing in front of a fireplace, saying, home is warm and somebody's waiting. He thought about the way Claire had walked out of his office 2 weeks ago, with the folder in her hands and her chin up and the particular quality of a person who had just reclaimed a decision that belonged to them. Because the alternative was handling it my way, he said. And my way is the reason you learned to count in the first place. She stood in the rain and looked at him and did not speak. And then she went back inside. Dominic stood in the wet yard for another minute. Frank materialized beside him with an umbrella that he held at a slight angle to account for the wind, which was practical and completely useless, and exactly the kind of thing Frank did. The family council will hear about this by morning, Frank said. I know. Raymond will consider it a declaration. I know. 3 of the bank partners will call this week to discuss. Frank. Yes, I know. Frank lowered the umbrella slightly. Was it worth it? Dominic looked at the cottage window. The light inside was on. Claire's shadow moved across it, getting a towel. Probably, or putting the kettle on, or doing any of the ordinary things that people do in safe places when the danger has passed. And safety itself is still new enough to feel extraordinary. Ask me in 6 months, he said. But his voice when he said it did not sound like a man who needed to wait to know the answer. The real collision came not that night, but 5 days later, in a conference room at the county courthouse under fluorescent lights and the particular oppressive quiet of official proceedings. Travis arrived with a lawyer who wore a suit that communicated expense and a face that communicated the patient confidence of a man who had won arguments like this before. Travis himself was composed. He had spent 4 nights recalibrating and had returned to the version of himself he deployed for professional settings, sympathetic, reasonable, slightly wounded in a way that read as forgivable rather than dangerous. He sat across the table from Claire and looked at her with an expression of careful, managed concern. You look tired, he said. Are they treating you well here? I've been worried. Claire said nothing. The lawyer opened a folder. He spoke about the absence of formal documentation of abuse. He spoke about a pattern of decisions leaving without notice, denying a father contact with his child, establishing a relationship with a man of known criminal connections that painted a picture of a woman who was not making choices from a position of safety, but from a position of manipulation. He used the word manipulation twice in the same sentence and let it sit. Dominic was seated beside Claire with his own attorney. He had a very specific impulse at that moment, the impulse of someone who has resources and knows how to use them, who could lean forward and dismantle every word the opposing lawyer had said before the sentence finished. He had done it before. He was good at it. He looked at Claire instead. She was watching the lawyer speak. Her face was the controlled, careful face he had seen on the staircase the first morning, but something underneath it was different now. It was not the control of someone who was afraid to move. It was the control of someone who was choosing to wait. Dominic leaned back in his chair. He did not speak. When the lawyer finished, the mediator looked at Claire. Ms. Bennett, do you have a response? Claire stood up. She was not loud. She was not dramatic. She spoke in the same voice she had used through the cottage door when she told Travis about the camera. Clear, level, completely unhurried. You told me I was difficult, she said, looking at Travis directly, until I forgot that I was allowed to disagree. You called it love until I learned to apologize for taking up space. You made every decision and told me that was practical. And I believed you for long enough that I stopped remembering what I thought before you started thinking for me. A pause. I wasn't difficult, Travis. I was afraid. And the difference between those two things is the whole story. Travis's carefully managed expression flickered. Detective Brooks stood up next. She placed a tablet on the table and played 23 seconds of audio from the rear security camera. Travis's voice, his words, the real inventory of what he believed. The lawyer reached for Travis's arm. Travis was looking at Claire. His expression had finished flickering. What was underneath it was not anger. It was something older and less managed, the specific look of a person who has just heard themselves described accurately for the first time and has not yet decided how to respond. Then the door opened. A woman walked in who had not been on the attendee list. She was in her late 60s, precisely dressed, carrying a cardboard banker's box that she set on the table beside Detective Brooks without asking anyone's permission. Travis went white. Mom, he said. Margaret Mercer looked at her son for a moment. She had his eyes or he had hers. The same shape, the same structure. But the expression in them was completely different from anything Travis had managed in this room. I called Detective Brooks last week, Margaret said to the mediator, ignoring Travis entirely. I have photographs. She opened the box. I have dates going back 9 years. I have notes that I kept in a journal because I needed to record them somewhere, and I did not have the courage to tell anyone. She stopped. She looked at Claire then, and the look on her face was something that had no comfortable name. It was guilt that had lived a long time and finally found the room where it belonged. I watched, I documented, and I said nothing to anyone because I told myself it was private, it was family, it would resolve itself. Travis said, "Mom, stop." She looked at him. "I stayed silent long enough to fail 2 women," she said. "I will not fail a third." She sat down and began explaining the contents of the box. Travis's lawyer stopped writing notes at some point during the next 12 minutes and simply held his pen. Travis asked once, near the end, if his mother would post bail when the criminal charges were filed. He asked it in the voice of someone asking a question they already know the answer to, but need to hear said out loud. Margaret looked at her hands. "No," she said, "I won't." The drive back to Blackwater Ridge was quiet. Claire sat in the passenger seat and watched the coastal road move under them and said nothing for a long time. Dominic drove and did not fill the silence. At some point she said, "I didn't know about her, about what she'd been through." "No, he learned it," Claire said. "That's what he didn't invent it. He learned it. Somewhere inside that house, watching something, absorbing something, and it became him." She was quiet, and she watched herself teach it. For years, Dominic kept his eyes on the road. "The worst part," Claire said, "isn't even Travis. The worst part is how many times it has to happen before someone decides that the keeping quiet is the problem, not the thing being kept quiet about." She paused. "Margaret kept quiet for 30 years. And what did that cost her? Me, Lucy. Travis even. It cost Travis the possibility of ever being a different person because nobody said out loud that what he was seeing at home was wrong. He thought about his own family, about the silences that had been called loyalty, about the fear that had been called respect, about the things that had been done in private and protected by the absence of witnesses. "I know," he said. She looked at him. It was a long look, the kind that happens between people who have arrived separately at the same understanding. They drove the rest of the way without speaking. But the silence was different now. It was not the silence of things being avoided. It was the silence of things that had finally been said and did not need to be repeated. The first call came at 6:42 in the morning, 2 days after the courthouse. Dominic was already awake. He had been awake since 4, sitting at his desk with coffee that had gone cold, working through the financial reports that Gerald had quietly left outside his office door the previous evening with a note that said only, "Review before morning." Gerald's notes were always economical. This one more than usual, which told Dominic everything he needed to know about the contents before he opened the folder. The call was from Marcus Hale, one of the 3 primary bank partners who had been cautiously, incrementally extending legitimate credit lines to Blackwater Ridge over the previous 18 months. Marcus was 61, careful, the kind of man who wore the same watch for 20 years because it told the time accurately, and he had decided that was what a watch was for. "Dominic," Marcus said, "we need to talk about the incident at the resort. We can talk about it, the police presence. Your name in the incident report. The federal investigation, which has been ongoing for 3 years and predates my involvement with your institution by 14 months. You knew about it when we began the relationship." A pause. "The visibility has changed. The facts haven't." "Dominic." Marcus's voice was the voice of a man who is about to say something he has already decided to say and is only performing the courtesy of a preamble. "We're going to need to pause the credit extension pending a review. It's not a withdrawal. It's a pause." Dominic knew the difference between a pause and a withdrawal in the same way he knew the difference between someone leaving a room and someone leaving for good. The distinction existed in language. In practice, it was the same exit. "I understand," he said. "It's not personal. It never is." He said it without bitterness, which was harder than it sounded. "Thank you for calling directly, Marcus." He hung up and made a note in the margin of Gerald's report. The second call came at 8:15, the third at 9. By noon, he had spoken to 7 different people. Each conversation a variation on the same theme. The visibility had changed. The comfort level had shifted. The timing was difficult. Each one was polite. Each one was final. Gerald appeared in the doorway at 12:30 with a second folder. Dominic looked at it. "How bad?" he said. 3 of the family council members have formally withdrawn from the transition plan. The 2 coastal properties in development are effectively frozen pending financing that we no longer have access to. The resort operations are solvent for approximately 4 months at current expenditure levels. Gerald paused. After that, decisions will need to be made about staffing. Dominic looked at the folder without opening it. "And Raymond?" "He has called the family council meeting for Friday. He will present the situation as evidence that the transition strategy was flawed from the beginning." Gerald hesitated, which was unusual for Gerald. He is framing it as a rescue operation, returning the family to what he calls sustainable operations. Sustainable operations, the phrase for what came before. The lending networks, the coastal property manipulation, The arrangements that kept the Vale name solvent by keeping it dangerous. Who's still with us, Frank? Myself. The resort staff. A beat. The greenhouse program has 3 inquiries from regional hotels about supply contracts. Claire filed them with my office yesterday morning. Dominic looked up. She filed them. Formal inquiry documents. Pricing sheets. A 3-month growing calendar. Gerald allowed himself something that was almost a smile. She apparently decided the program needed revenue documentation. Dominic opened the folder. He spent the next 40 minutes reading every number. He did not soften them in his mind or look for qualifications. He read them the way you read something true completely, without defense. Then he picked up his phone and called his personal attorney. I need to release the Hargrove financial records, he said. The full set. The lending network documents, the property manipulation records from Raymond's tenure, everything we have from the past 6 years. His attorney was quiet for a long time. Dominic. Those records include, I know what they include. There are names in those records that will, I know whose names are in there. If we release these, the federal investigation expands significantly. Your own exposure, I know my exposure. He paused. I've known my exposure for 3 years. I've been managing it. I'm done managing it. Release the records. Another long pause. This will likely result in criminal charges for several family members, potentially including yourself. Then it will result in criminal charges. He kept his voice level. The alternative is continuing to protect a system that should not be protected. I've run out of reasons to keep doing that. His attorney exhaled. I need 24 hours to prepare the documentation. You have it. He hung up. He sat for a moment. Then he walked to Frank's office. Frank was behind his desk with 2 phones and a legal pad covered in numbers. He looked up when Dominic came in and read whatever was on his face accurately enough to set both phones down. I'm releasing the records, Dominic said. Frank did not react immediately. He looked at his legal pad for a moment, then at the window, then back at Dominic. The Hargrove records, Frank said. All of it. That's Raymond. That's the Portland network. That's I know what it is. Frank was quiet for a long time. Then the family will call it betrayal. The family called silence loyalty for 40 years, Dominic said. I've seen what loyalty like that costs. I've seen it in a metal box on a staircase. I've seen it in a child's hospital bracelet that she won't take off because it's the first thing that had her real name on it. He stopped. I'm done calling it something it isn't. Frank looked at him for another moment. Then he picked up the legal pad and said, then we need to talk about which properties can be sold to keep the resort operational while this processes. And we need to talk about it today because Friday is Raymond's council meeting, and if we don't have a counter structure before then, we lose the floor. Dominic sat down. They talked for 3 hours. Raymond arrived at Dominic's office that evening without an appointment, which was Raymond's way of demonstrating that he did not believe appointments applied to him. He came in, looked around the office the same way he always looked around it, and sat down. You released the records, he said. My attorney filed them this afternoon. The federal investigation will expand to include 16 active associates, 3 of whom have been specifically protected for the past 8 years because of their cooperation with. I know who they are, Raymond. Raymond looked at him with an expression that was the most honest Dominic had ever seen on his face. Not anger, not calculation, something older than either a genuine deep unmanaged pain. I spent 4 years in prison for your father. 4 years. My marriage ended in the 2nd year. My daughter stopped recognizing me by the time I got out. His voice was flat in the way that voices go flat when the emotion underneath has been compressed for so long it has become structural. I gave that to this family, to your father specifically. And the family treated it as something I had chosen freely and fully, as though the debt ran in my direction. The office was very quiet. I know, Dominic said, you know. Raymond's voice held something complicated, not quite contempt, not quite sorrow. And what does knowing cost you? That's what I want to talk to you about. Dominic opened a folder on his desk. I have had 3 separate attorneys review the financial records from your incarceration period. The years you lost, the income differential, the dissolution of your marriage and its financial consequences. He turned the folder so Raymond could see it. That is a legal documented payment structure. Lifetime. Indexed to inflation. It accounts for every year. Raymond looked at the folder. He looked at it for a long time without touching it. You're paying me, he said. I'm acknowledging a debt that the family created and then decided was voluntary. There's a difference. You're putting a number on my loyalty. I'm putting a number on what was taken from you, Dominic said. The loyalty was yours. What happened to your life because of it was not a choice you made. It was a cost you were handed. Those are different things, Raymond. And I'm done pretending they're the same. Raymond reached forward and turned the folder to read it properly. He read every page. It took 11 minutes. The office was completely silent. When he was done, he closed the folder. He sat for a moment with his hands on it. "You're removing me from the businesses," he said. "Yes, everything, yes. And replacing 40 years of what I built with." He stopped. "With a housekeeper's greenhouse and a staff meal program. With a legitimate resort operation that doesn't require me to make people disappear to protect it." Raymond was quiet. He looked at his hands on the folder. "The humiliation of this," he said quietly, "is not the money. The money is—" He stopped again. "The humiliation is that you looked at what I gave and decided it had a price, like it was a transaction. The humiliation," Dominic said carefully, "was allowing you to believe that your life cost this family nothing. That was the original humiliation, Raymond. I'm trying to correct it. The correction is uncomfortable because the original wrong was that significant." Raymond stood up. He picked up the folder. He held it at his side. "I will not forgive you for this," he said. "I'm not asking you to. The council meeting on Friday, do what you need to do on Friday. I'll be there." Raymond walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and did not turn around. "Your father would have called this weakness." "I know he would have," Dominic said. "I've spent a long time deciding whether that bothers me." Raymond left. Dominic sat alone in his office for several minutes. Then he stood up, put on his jacket, and walked to the east side of the property. The greenhouse light was on. It was past 8 in the evening, and Claire was still there, which no longer surprised him. She was at the back potting bench with a set of propagation trays, working with the focused, efficient attention that she brought to everything, the quality of someone who had learned that thoroughness was a form of safety and had kept the habit long after the original reason for it changed. She heard him come in and looked up. "Gerald told me about the bank calls," she said. "Gerald talks too much. Gerald talks exactly the right amount." She set down the trowel she was holding. "How bad is it?" he told her. He did not soften the numbers. He told her about the credit freeze, the 3 council defections, the 4 months of operational solvency, and the property sales that would be needed to extend that window. He told her about the record release and what it would likely mean for the federal investigation's scope. He told her about Raymond. She listened without interrupting. She did not make the face that people make when they are absorbing bad news and trying to decide how to react to the performance of concern. She just listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The greenhouse supply contracts," she said. "The 3 inquiries I filed with Gerald, those are real. I looked at the numbers. If we convert 2 more beds to cut flower production and add a micro-herb section for the restaurant supply side, the program can be net positive within 6 months. He looked at her. "It's not enough to save the coastal properties," she said. "I know that. But it's real revenue that comes from something that exists. Something that isn't built on anything that has to be kept secret." She paused. "I also talked to Donna this morning. She has contacts at 2 other coastal resorts who are looking for local produce suppliers. She's been buying from a distributor in Portland and paying shipping cost on top. If we can produce locally, Claire." She stopped. "You're rebuilding my business model," he said. "I'm filing supply contracts," she said. "There's a difference." He almost smiled. "You said that like someone I know." She picked up the trowel again and looked at it. "You lost all of this because of me. I lost it because I made a choice. Because of me. Because of a principle," he said. "You happen to be the person who made the principle visible." A pause. "Those are different things, Claire." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at the propagation tray. "Frank told me what you said in the yard about your father teaching you to make people disappear. Frank also talks too much. Frank talks exactly the right amount." She set the trowel down again and turned to face him fully. "You could have handled Travis the other way. I know that. Every person at this resort who's been here longer than a month knows that. And you didn't. No, why do you keep saying the principle like I'm not the person standing in it?" He looked at her steadily. "Because I need you to know that what I did had nothing to do with what I want from you. Those need to be completely separate things. If they're not separate, then everything I said about choices and freedom it's just a better decorated version of what Travis did." She was quiet. "I have wanted things from people my whole life," he said. "I have used what I have to get them. That's my honest history. And I am trying for the first time, with real effort, to do something differently. With you." A pause. "Which means the record stays clean regardless of outcome. You need to know that." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "The Friday council meeting. What about it? Are you going to lose it?" He considered the question honestly. "I'm going to go to it. Whether I lose it depends on how many people still believe that what we're building here is worth the cost of building it the right way. Is there anything I can do? You already filed the supply contracts. That's not what I mean. He thought about it for a moment. Come to the meeting, he said. She blinked. I'm a housekeeper. You're the director of a greenhouse program with 3 supply contract inquiries and a business model that doesn't require anyone to disappear. He paused. Come to the meeting and bring the numbers. Friday came fast. The family council met in the large conference room on the resort's executive floor, a room Dominic associated with decisions that had consequences measured in years, not weeks. 8 men around a table. Raymond at one end, Dominic at the other. Frank beside Dominic, Gerald with 2 folders, and Claire in the chair Frank had placed at the side of the table when he set up the room that morning, with her own folder and the supply contracts and the 6-month production forecast she had typed out at 4 in the morning because she didn't have Gerald. Raymond looked at her when he came in and said nothing. His face did what it did when he was processing information and had decided to wait before responding to it. Raymond laid out his argument with the precision of someone who had been building it for 3 weeks. The record release had compromised 16 associates. The banking relationships were frozen. The coastal properties were stalled. The transition strategy had, in his view, failed at the first serious test the moment personal sentiment overrode strategic judgment. He used the word sentiment once. He did not look at Claire when he said it, which was more pointed than looking at her would have been. He proposed returning the family's remaining operations to what he called established structures, meaning the lending networks, meaning the property arrangements, meaning everything Dominic had spent 3 years trying to dismantle. 3 of the 8 men nodded while he spoke. 3 sat with the neutral, careful faces of people who had not yet decided. 1 was looking at Gerald's folder. Raymond finished and looked at Dominic. Dominic let 1 beat of silence pass. Then he said, Claire. She opened her folder. She spoke for 11 minutes. She did not use technical language or try to perform expertise she didn't have. She spoke the way she spoke in the greenhouse, clearly, accurately, without decoration. Numbers, timelines, contracts that were real, signed by real buyers who needed real product. A model that worked not because it was clever, but because it was legitimate, because it did not require secrecy, because it could be explained to a bank, to a federal investigator, to anyone who walked through the door. When she finished, the room was quiet. The man who had been looking at Gerald's folder said, "These supply contracts are active?" "Inquiries are filed," Claire said. "Conversion to contracts depends on production capacity, which is dependent on the bed expansion. I have a timeline." She passed copies around the table. She had made 8. She had counted the chairs when Frank described the meeting to her. The man looked at the timeline. "In the micro-herb supply chain for restaurant, I have 3 specific restaurants in the regional market that currently import from California. The shipping cost alone makes local supply competitive at a margin that..." She turned to a page in her folder. "I've documented here." Raymond was looking at her now. He was looking at her the way he had looked at the payment folder in Dominic's office, with the complicated attention of a man encountering something he had categorized and is now recategorizing. The vote came 90 minutes later, 4-3 in favor of continuing the transition strategy. 1 abstention. Raymond received the count with the stillness of a man who has lost before and knows how to absorb it in public. He did not look at Claire. He gathered his papers, stood, and said to Dominic, 4-3 is not a mandate. "No," Dominic agreed. "It's a beginning." Raymond left. The man who had asked about the supply contracts stopped beside Claire on his way out. He looked at the folder in her hand. "The restaurant supply model," he said. "If you expand that to include the 2 resorts Donna mentioned, your Donna, from the kitchen, that changes the 6-month projections significantly." "I know," Claire said. "I'm working on it." He nodded once and left. Frank appeared at Dominic's shoulder as the room emptied. 4-3, he said quietly. 4-3, Dominic confirmed. "Raymond will come back. He'll always come back. That's Raymond. Is that a problem?" Dominic watched Claire organizing her folder with the same thoroughness she brought to folding linens in the laundry room. "Raymond is a problem I can manage," he said. "The problems I couldn't manage were the ones I was pretending weren't problems." Frank followed his gaze to Claire. "She counted the chairs," he said. "For the copies." "I know." She counted the chairs and she made exactly 8 copies. She walked into a room full of men who have been making decisions about power and money for 40 years. And she made 8 copies of a produce supply contract, and she changed 4 votes. 3, Dominic said. "She had one already." Frank looked at him. "You didn't have one, Dominic." You had a pause. She gave you a vote. The Lucy news came 48 hours after the council meeting from the hospital's case review coordinator in a call that Gerald patched through to Dominic's office at 10 in the morning. The insurance company's expedited review, the review that had been quietly, structurally nudged along through channels that Dominic had never described to Claire, had approved the surgical procedure. The hospital had an opening in the pediatric cardiac surgery schedule in 3 weeks. There was a remaining cost gap that the insurance approval did not cover. That gap was addressed through a combination of 3 sources: a hospital financial assistance program, a regional Children's Health Foundation grant that Frank had identified and Gerald had filed the paperwork for, and a new resort employee emergency fund that Dominic had established 2 weeks earlier and funded through the first of the property sales. Not through a personal payment, not through a debt that Claire would carry in some form that could never be fully repaid. Through structures that existed independent of him, that she had accessed as an employee, that left nothing between them that looked like obligation. He'd been careful about this with the particular precision of someone who understands that the difference between help and control often lives entirely in the structure of how help is delivered. When Gerald told him the funding was complete, he said, "Does Claire know the breakdown?" "She has the full documentation," Gerald said. "I made sure of it." "All of it, the emergency fund specifically?" "She knows the fund is a resort employee program. She knows she qualified. She knows every source." Gerald paused. "She asked me 4 times whether there was any personal contribution from you specifically." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That the property sale proceeds funded the emergency fund, which is a resort program, and that the fund's disbursements are determined by a 3-person review committee that includes Frank, HR, and the staff representative." "And she accepted that?" "She asked to see the committee charter." Gerald allowed himself a full smile this time. "I gave it to her. She read all of it. Then she said, and I'm quoting, 'Tell me, Vale, that when I'm no longer relying on this program, I'd like to join the review committee.'" Dominic was quiet for a moment. "Put her name on the list," he said. Claire received the surgery approval that afternoon by phone. She was in the greenhouse. Frank told Dominic about the call secondhand because Frank had been walking past and heard her voice through the open door change in a way that made him stop. She had said very quietly, "Yes. Yes, I understood. Thank you. I need a minute. I'll call you back." And then there was the sound of something being set down carefully on a potting bench, and then silence that lasted about 90 seconds. And then her voice again, steady. "Okay, I'm ready. Tell me the date." When Dominic saw her that evening, she looked like someone who had been carrying something for a very long time and had just been allowed to put it down. Not empty, the opposite. Like the putting down had revealed how much space was available that the weight had been occupying. 3 weeks, she said, "I heard. The emergency fund. You qualified." She looked at him. "Dominic, you qualified," he said again. "Same as any employee on the same circumstances. I can have Gerald walk you through the exact eligibility criteria if I read the charter. Then you know you qualified." She looked at him for a long moment. "You are the most careful man I have ever met," she said. He was not entirely sure how she meant it, but the way she said it with the particular warmth that comes from recognizing something you weren't expecting to find made him think it was not a complaint. 3 weeks, he said. 3 weeks, she confirmed. She went back to her propagation trays. He stayed in the doorway for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, and then he went back to his office, and neither of them made note of the extra moment. But it was there, and they both knew it. The night before Lucy's surgery, Frank sat in the hospital waiting area long after visiting hours and did not move until a night nurse told him gently that he would need to wait in the main lobby. He moved to the main lobby and sat in a chair near the entrance doors and stayed there. At some point, Claire came down from Lucy's room and found him. She sat in the chair beside him without saying anything for a while. The lobby was the particular quiet of a hospital at 2 in the morning, not silence, but the kind of reduced noise that makes the sounds that remain feel significant. "You were at the Portland bus terminal on purpose," she said finally. Frank looked at the entrance doors. "You go back there," she said. "Frank, you go back there regularly." He was quiet for a long time. "Then my daughter's name was Sarah. She called me 3 times. 3 separate calls, 3 separate nights. I was in the middle of something for Dominic's father, and I told myself I'd call her back, and he stopped. The 3rd call, I didn't answer at all. I told myself she would call again, that it could wait one more night." His hands on his knees were very still. She didn't call again. Claire sat with that. After, Frank said, I started going to the terminal on the nights I couldn't sleep. I don't know when it became regular. It just I would sit in the same chair, near the platform, and I would watch. I think I was watching for her. I know that's not rational. But I was watching for someone who needed what she needed, and I hadn't given her. He paused. When you came off the bus with Lucy, with that suitcase and that box, and the child asleep on your shoulder the way you looked at the schedule board, like you were calculating, like you were still deciding. His voice was very quiet. I recognized it. Claire put her hand on Frank's arm. She didn't say anything. She just left it there. I should have answered the phone, Frank said. You answered it this time, she said. He looked at her. His eyes were wet in the way of someone who has kept something dry for a very long time and has just run out of the energy to continue. It's not the same, he said. No, she agreed, it's not the same. But it's what you have, and you did it. And Lucy is upstairs in a room that's warm, with a bracelet on her wrist and her real name on it. She paused. That's yours, Frank. You get to keep that. He nodded once. Then he looked at the entrance doors again and did not speak for a while. They sat together in the lobby until morning. Lucy's surgery lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. Dominic knew this because he was in the waiting room for all of it. He had not planned to be. He had driven Frank and Claire to the hospital that morning with the intention of dropping them off and returning to the resort, where Gerald had 3 urgent calls scheduled and the property sale documents needed his signature before noon. He had told himself this on the drive. He had told himself this in the hospital parking lot. He had walked them to the surgical floor, and then he had sat down in one of the waiting room chairs, and he had not gotten back up. Gerald rescheduled the calls. The documents waited. Frank sat on his left. Claire sat on his right. Between the 3 of them, they spoke perhaps 40 words in 4 hours and 17 minutes, and none of those words were about anything important, and all of them were. At one point, Claire said, without looking at either of them, she made me promise to ask for chocolate ice cream the moment she was allowed to eat. Frank said, what kind? She said any kind was fine, but that she preferred mint chip, and I should tell them that if there was a choice. Nobody said anything else for several minutes. Then Frank stood up and went to find a nurse to ask about the hospital cafeteria's ice cream situation, because Frank was a man who dealt with waiting by converting it into logistics, and this was the most useful logistics available. Claire watched him go. Then she said, very quietly, to no one in particular, he sat in the lobby all night. I know, Dominic said. He told me about Sarah. He's never told anyone about Sarah. Not in 11 years. She was quiet for a moment. He needed to tell someone. He needed to tell you specifically, Dominic said. There's a difference. She looked at her hands in her lap. She had a small piece of dried lavender stem in her left hand, something she must have picked up from the greenhouse without noticing, carried all morning in her closed fist. She had been turning it between her fingers for hours. The surgeon came out at 11:43. He said the procedure had gone well. He said the valve was repaired. He said Lucy would be in recovery for approximately 2 hours and could have visitors in the early afternoon, and that the first day would be for rest, and that by the 3rd day, she would likely be demanding things they were not yet prepared to give her. Claire stood up when he started talking and did not sit back down. She listened to every word, standing perfectly still with her arms at her sides and the lavender stem still in her left hand. When the surgeon finished, she said, "Thank you," in a voice that was very composed and very small. Then she sat back down and the composure went, not loudly, not dramatically. It went the way things go after they have been held in place by pure force of will for a very long time, all at once, without warning, without the luxury of a transition. Her face simply stopped performing steadiness and became the face of a woman who had been terrified for months and had just been handed permission to stop. Dominic did not say anything. He did not offer speech or a reassurance or a perspective. He reached over and put his hand over hers, the one with the lavender stem, and left it there. She turned her hand over and held on. Frank came back with 3 cups of terrible hospital coffee and stopped when he saw them. He set the coffee down on the seat beside him, sat quietly, and did not say a single word, which was the most eloquent thing Frank had done in years. They stayed like that until Claire was ready to be something other than relieved. It took about 12 minutes. Then she straightened, released Dominic's hand, picked up the coffee, took a sip, and said, "This is terrible." "Hospital coffee," Frank said, universally. "Why does nobody fix that? Some problems persist because everyone assumes someone else is handling it." She looked at him. Then she looked at Dominic, and she started laughing the same real, involuntary laugh that had happened in the greenhouse the first time, but longer this time and less immediately suppressed. The laugh of someone who has just come through something enormous and found, on the other side of it, that ordinary things are still absurd, and that absurdity is, in fact, the correct response. Dominic watched her laugh and felt something loosen in his chest that he did not have a precise name for. When Lucy woke from recovery that afternoon, the first thing she said was, "Did you ask about mint chip?" Frank produced a small cup of mint chip ice cream from his jacket pocket, with the timing of a man who had been planning this moment for 3 hours. Lucy looked at it. She looked at Frank. She looked at Claire and Dominic standing behind him. "You were all here," she said. "We were all here," Claire confirmed. Lucy looked at the ice cream and then back at the room full of people who had waited 4 hours and 17 minutes for her to wake up. "Okay," she said, with the profound satisfaction of a child whose expectations have been not just met but specifically, carefully understood. "Okay, good." She ate the ice cream. She showed everyone her new hospital bracelet. She said she was going to keep both bracelets, the old one, from when people didn't know who she was, and the new one from the day the doctors fixed the door in her heart. Frank made a sound that he immediately covered by coughing. Dominic looked at the ceiling for a moment. Claire pressed her lips together and blinked several times and held it together with the particular determination of a woman who had decided she was done crying in front of people for at least the rest of this day. She made it another 4 minutes before Lucy said, "Mom, you can cry. It's the good kind." And that was the end of holding it together for everyone in the room. Spring arrived at Blackwater Ridge the way spring arrives on the Oregon coast, not gently, but with a kind of insistent incremental force that eventually overtook everything you thought was permanent about winter. The light changed first. Then the temperature slowly, with setbacks that felt like arguments and then resolved. Then the ground softened, and the things that had been waiting underground came up. The greenhouse came up with them. By March, the first beds were producing. Ranunculus, locally adapted varieties of anemone, sweet peas climbing the repaired south trellis, lavender in the long bed that Claire had rebuilt from the rusted irrigation frame over the course of 3 weeks in January. The micro-herbs section occupied the northeast corner: basil, thyme, several varieties of mint, a small bay laurel that Claire was not certain about but had planted anyway because, as she told Gerald when he asked, it was worth trying. The first guest room arrangements went out on a Tuesday in early March. Each one came with a small handwritten card that said, "These flowers were grown on this property. Damaged plants can bloom again when they are given light, time, and care." By the end of the month, the first supply contract had converted from inquiry to signed agreement. By mid-April, the second, Frank had a conversation with Donna's contact at the North Coastal Resort, and that conversation became a meeting, and that meeting became a third contract that was larger than the first two combined. Gerald updated the 6-month projection. The new numbers were not the same as the old projections before. For the bank freeze, they were smaller in total revenue, more modest in scope, but they were real. They were clean. They required nothing to be hidden. Dominic signed the updated projection and put it in the file and did not make a speech about it. The criminal charges resulting from the Hargrove record release moved through the federal system with the grinding, impersonal efficiency of large institutional processes. Raymond's name appeared in the filings. So did the names of the 16 associates he had warned about. So, in a more limited capacity, did Dominic's. His attorney managed the exposure with the full documentation of cooperation, the voluntary record release, the dismantling of the lending network, the cessation of the property manipulation arrangements. The federal prosecutors were not warm about Dominic's history, which was correct of them. They were accurate about his cooperation, which was also correct. The outcome was uncertain for several months. During those months, Dominic continued to run the resort. He attended every meeting his attorney required, provided every document requested, and answered every question directly. He did not perform remorse. He had spent enough time around men who performed remorse to know what it looked like and to have no interest in adding his name to that list. What he had was an honest accounting of what had happened under the Vale name, what his own participation had been, and what he was doing differently. That was the only thing he had to offer, and he offered it completely. One evening in late April, Detective Elena Brooks came to his office. She came without a folder this time, without the badge positioned for maximum visibility. She sat down across from him and said, "The task force lead wants me to formally acknowledge your cooperation. That's not the same as forgiveness or clearance, but it's the record. I understand the distinction. I want to ask you something off the record. Go ahead. Why did you release the Hargrove documents? And I don't mean the principled answer. I mean the actual reason. He thought about it for a moment. He thought about Frank in a hospital lobby chair at 2 in the morning. He thought about a child counting seconds on the floor, while her mother smiled so she wouldn't be frightened. He thought about the counting game and what it meant that a 5-year-old had been taught to play it. Because I finally understood what it costs, he said. The silence. The protection of the structure at the expense of the people inside it. A pause. I'd been told it cost nothing. I watched a woman explain to me, in a greenhouse, in pieces, over 3 months, what it actually costs. And I ran out of reasons to argue. Brooks looked at him for a moment. Claire Bennett. Claire Bennett, he confirmed. Brooks stood. The investigation will continue. You understand that. I would think less of you if it didn't. She almost smiled. That's an interesting thing for you to say. I'm trying to be interesting in different ways than I used to be. She left. The Open Door Initiative launched on a Thursday in May. It was Claire's program, built on the structure she had designed herself over 4 months of evenings, after Lucy was in bed. The employment framework, the housing agreement, the health care access, the legal referral network, the child care arrangement with the resort's existing employee assistance program. She had written the guidelines herself, had Gerald review them for legal accuracy, and had presented them to the family council with the same folder and copies approach she had used in February. The vote was 6-1. Raymond was not present. He had stepped back from the council in March, which was the closest thing to a concession that Raymond Vale was constitutionally capable of. The program was named the Open Door Initiative because Claire had said simply that she wanted the name to describe what it actually was, a door that was open. Not a process or a pathway or a journey, a door. You could walk through it on your own terms. Margaret Mercer arrived at Blackwater Ridge on the first day of the program's operation. She came by car, alone, with no announcement. She had called Frank the previous week and asked whether she would be welcome. Frank had called Claire. Claire had said yes. Margaret stood in the greenhouse doorway and looked at the flowers growing in the repaired beds and did not speak for a moment. Then she said, I would like to volunteer, not for forgiveness. I'm not here for that. I'm here because I know what the warning signs look like, and I spent 30 years not saying so, and I would like to spend whatever time I have left saying so. Claire looked at her. The look was not warm and it was not cold. It was the look of someone making an honest assessment of something complicated. The first group orientation is on Monday, Claire said. 9 o'clock. Bring whatever you know. Margaret nodded. She started to say something else and then stopped. That's enough for today, Claire said, not unkindly, as a statement of fact. Monday. Margaret came on Monday. She came the Monday after that. She came every Monday. And after a while, she came on Wednesdays too, because there was more to say than once a week could hold. Frank started driving again. Not long distances, just the 12 miles to the regional transit hub, twice a week, early morning. He sat in the small waiting area the way he had sat in the Portland terminal, and when he saw someone come off the bus with the particular look of a person who had run out of options and was calculating what came next, he introduced himself and said there was work available if they needed honest employment. He did not offer money. He offered the address. 3 women came to Blackwater Ridge through Frank's twice-weekly drives in the first 2 months. 2 of them joined the program. One decided she needed to keep moving, and Frank helped her identify a shelter network 2 counties north, called ahead to confirm they had space, and drove her there himself. He did not tell Dominic about the drive until after. Dominic said nothing except the mileage is reimbursable. Frank said, I know. They did not discuss it further. Lucy came back to the resort on a Tuesday in late April, 6 weeks after surgery, carrying her rabbit and a new drawing she had made in the hospital. She went immediately to the greenhouse and sat at the small wooden stool that someone had placed at the end of Claire's work bench. No one admitted to putting it there, but it had appeared during the second week of February and had clearly been placed at the specific height that made sense for a 6-year-old to sit and watch her mother work. She sat on the stool and watched Claire check the lavender bed and said, it smells like the cards in the guest rooms. That's because it's the same lavender. People in the guest rooms are smelling our lavender? They are. Lucy considered this with the seriousness it deserved. That's good, she said finally. They should know things can grow here. Ranger materialized at some point during this conversation. Nobody saw him arrive. He was simply there, lying across the greenhouse doorway in the sun. in the specific position of a dog who has decided that this location is his and the decision is final. Lucy climbed off the stool, walked to him, sat down against his side with the matter-of-fact confidence of someone claiming a seat they know is always available, and resumed listening to her mother work. The new school enrollment went through in May. Lucy started on a Monday with her 2 bracelets and her stuffed rabbit in her backpack. Claire had negotiated with her for 20 minutes before they agreed the rabbit could come but would stay in the bag during class. By Thursday, Lucy had made a best friend named Priya, who had strong opinions about marine animals and math, and the stuffed rabbit issue became irrelevant because Priya also had one. On a Friday evening in late May, Claire signed a lease. It was a small house 8 minutes from the resort, a rental. Nothing dramatic. 2 bedrooms, a yard with a section that could be used for a garden, a landlord who had done a credit check and a reference check and extended the lease because Claire's employment verification, financial documentation, and reference letter from Gerald were entirely in order. Her name was on the lease. Only her name. She had her own bank account, her own health insurance through the resort's employee program, her own legal representation, arranged through the referral network she had built into the Open Door initiative because she had needed it herself and understood what it meant to have it. She had income savings, a signed lease, medical coverage, and a daughter enrolled in school with a cardiologist follow-up appointment in August. She did not need anything from Dominic Vale. She walked into his office on a Friday afternoon without knocking, which was new. He looked up from the property report he was reviewing. She sat down across from him, not on the edge of the chair, not in the positioned, managed way she had sat in his office the first time with the detective's folder. She sat down like a person who had decided to be in a room and was not calculating the exit. "I signed the lease this morning," she said. Gerald mentioned. He set down the report. "How does it feel like mine?" she said. "It feels exactly like mine." He nodded. She looked at him for a moment. "You told me something the night I brought you the detective's folder. I remember. You said when I could say no to you and lose nothing, not my job, not my home, not Lucy's care, then you'd know I was genuinely free." She paused. "I have my own home. I have my own income. Lucy's cares through her insurance, her school, her doctors. None of it runs through you." She held his gaze. "I can say no and lose nothing." The office was very quiet. "Yes, you can. I know." She looked at her hands for a moment, then back at him. "I needed you to know that I know, that I did the math, that I'm not sitting in this chair because I'm grateful, or because I feel like I owe you something, or because you're the most powerful person in the building." A pause. "I'm sitting here because I chose to." He said nothing. He let her have the sentence, the way he had learned to let her have things completely, without filling the space. "Your answer was supposed to wait," she said, "until I could say no." He looked at her, "But today," she said quietly, "my answer isn't no." The silence that followed was the kind that happens between 2 people who have both said the true thing and are now simply in the presence of it. No performance, no management. Just the fact of it, in a room where the afternoon light was coming through the east windows and the greenhouse was visible in the distance, and Ranger was somewhere on the property making his own decisions about where he was needed. Dominic leaned forward slightly. "Claire, don't make it complicated," she said. "I was going to say I'm glad." She looked at him. Then she said, "Me too." It was not a dramatic ending. There was no grand declaration, no gesture scaled for an audience. There was a woman who had rebuilt herself from the inside out, sitting across from a man who had spent months learning the difference between protection and possession, and both of them knowing clearly, without any ambiguity, exactly what kind of ground they were standing on. Ground that was level. Ground that belonged to both of them equally. Ground where the terms had been set by the person with less power, and the person with more power had honored every one of them without exception. That was the whole thing. That was all of it. In the greenhouse that same afternoon, Lucy finished the drawing she had been working on for 3 weeks. She brought it to Claire that evening and held it up. It showed a house with a very tall chimney and a large cloud of smoke rising from it. In front of the house stood 5 figures that she had labeled carefully in her 6-year-old handwriting: Claire, Dominic, Frank, Margaret, and Ranger, who was the same size as Dominic, which was probably accurate from Lucy's perspective. To the right of the group was the greenhouse, drawn as a rectangle full of small flowers that were mostly purple but some yellow. At the bottom, in the largest letters on the page, Lucy had written, "Home is where nobody has to hide." Claire held the drawing for a long time. Then she walked to the greenhouse and taped it to the inside of the south-facing window, where the light would come through it every morning, and the guests walking past on the east path could see it from the outside. She stood back and looked at it. A house with smoke rising. 5 people in front of it. Flowers growing in the light. A child's proof that warmth was real, that names mattered, that the door could be open, and the people inside it could be trusted to let you stay. Claire had arrived at Blackwater Ridge with a broken suitcase, a metal box, a sleeping child, and the practiced invisibility of someone who had learned that being noticed was dangerous. She left the greenhouse that evening in her own car, to her own house, with her daughter beside her and her name on the lease, and not one single thing in her life that required someone else's permission to keep. That was what safety actually looked like. Not rescue. Not protection delivered from above by someone more powerful. Not a cage with better intentions than the last one. It looked like a woman driving home on a Friday evening, knowing that every good thing in her life was hers because she had built it, and that the people who had helped her do it had understood from the beginning that helping was not the same as owning. Lucy fell asleep in the passenger seat with her rabbit on her lap and both bracelets on her wrist. Claire drove with the window down and the spring air coming through and did not count a single second. She did not need to anymore.